Rite of Passage, the podcast with Giabra Martin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of the Rite of Passage podcast. I am very excited today. We are here with Mr. Ron Shaw.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey, Ron. And he and I met briefly before this. I got the email that he joined the Zoom. So I was like, I'm going to log in, check on him. We'll talk a minute just because I got the 40-minute limit. I complimented him on the Santa Claus hat because everyone, I don't know, I love the Christmas vibes. It just makes me feel good. So, and with the beard too, I don't know, you got the whole thing
Yeah,
going on and I dig it.
that's
The
that's
lights.
like I tell everyone this is my plan. If the writing doesn't work out, I've got the job as Santa backed up ready.
You know,
Here just needs maybe another season or two before it gets to the full
it'll
light.
be there. It'll get there. It's on the way for sure. So, sir, I have your Amazon author profile pulled up. I'm looking at Echoes of Reckoning right now, and I am very, very interested. So, first of all, is that in the reflection, is that the Chicago skyline?
Yes, yes.
I actually grew up in the Chicago area, so I was like, it looks pretty familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the story is based in Chicago. Like it's where a bulk of this first one takes place.
Yeah.
And it was just, fond memories. I lived in Chicago for about three to 4 years.
No
Uh,
kidding.
and it was just, able to pull out the scenery and stuff in there. Like when you're trying to get familiar with something, it's like, all right, I'm going to use something that I know to kind of ground the
Right.
base of what I'm writing on.
Well, I absolutely love the cover. I don't know, it speaks to me like the colors, the look is beautiful, beautiful design. And as I'm looking, you've got just so far perfect reviews. So I'm incredibly interested in this book. It's part of a series, obviously.
Yeah, it's my Purgatory series. This is Echoes of Reckoning is the first book. Broken Reflections is the second book, and I've just started writing the third book, which is going to be called Death's Sweet Whisper.
Nice. Is it going to be three in total, or how many do you think it's going to end up with?
I'm thinking three, but I never know. The characters normally tell me as I get to the end if they want another book. Like when I started this, I thought that Broken Reflections was going to be the end of the series.
Hmm.
There was one character once I got done that was just screaming to me of like, no, I need more. So I kind of wove that in knowing that I would do at least one more in this series.
It's amazing how like these books can take on a life of their own like that, and the characters themselves like have an entire life somehow.
Oh,
Um, it's always been a little strange, right? It's like they came out of your head, but it feels like there's something more to that sometimes, right? You're like, "There's something." Anyway, I don't want to get, but it is interesting. So do you like plan everything out in advance, or I mean, you kind of let the story take you on a journey?
I let the story go. Well, with the first book, Echoes of Reckoning, it was go. It was kind of write and see what happens.
Yeah.
When I got to Broken Reflections, I took some of the lessons learned and I still let the story flow, but I made sure I had an idea of where it was starting and where it was ending because
Okay.
that was kind of the challenge that hit me when I was writing Echoes of Reckoning is I hit a couple roadblocks because I wasn't sure where the ending was going. So I
Right.
had to pause there for a moment and look and be like, all right, I need to kind of chart this out a little bit better, but I don't like in-depth planning. I like to just kind of let the characters guide me on their journey as they're going.
It is interesting. I'm always curious different people's methods, right? Like I have one book that was inspired by a dream and I dreamt the ending. And I was like, well, what the hell happens from everywhere from the beginning to that point, right? And it's like the one thing I understood was how it ends, but other books, I know a lot of authors, I mean, it's like they have the initial seed of a story and they start writing and they're like, you know what, I'm gonna let this thing have just a life of its own and it's gonna go where it wants to go. And I don't even know how it's gonna end yet. And maybe that's the fun of it, right?
Yeah,
So
it definitely it makes part of the whole journey along with kind of just letting it go sometimes like that.
yeah. Do you want to tell me anything about Echoes of Reckoning? I'm very curious about this book.
So, Echoes of Reckoning is a story about this guy who just, he initially starts out, you're meeting him, you know that he's unalived towards the very beginning of the story. But what it does is it goes back, it steps back and looks at his story and develops him into this character and also his journey to meeting his fiance, who we also find out gets kind of unalived as the story goes, but
Okay.
that's not revealing anything special. That's on the back. You can read it.
Yeah.
But what it is, it's about them meeting, their relationship building up, and then what he goes through with her loss. And then also what I did is kind of at the back half of the book, like I liked his part of it, his journey into purgatory and out as he sees it. But then I also said it needed a different perspective. So I took her perspective and
Oh,
wrote it in her voice. So as you get, towards the latter half of the book, it jumps over and you're reading how she sees everything that's happened and the experience there. Really trying to dive into the human emotions that go along with death and it's
right.
things kind of dig deeper into what people actually feel and see and not necessarily talk about.
I kind of love that. I had a similar thought. I haven't, but like a story that is told from different perspectives. It's the same story, but obviously like the different things the different characters see in that same story or the different pieces of the puzzle they may have. So it is interesting in the same book, both these characters are kind of telling it from like how it, unfolded for them. Um, in terms of the sequel, like I mean, we're talking the same characters or it's just like kind of the same universe or
It's the same characters that have moved over into the second book. It's the second book takes a little bit more into the mythical approach. Like I've added some more characters in there. In the first book, there is like the one character, Azrael, who is the angel of death or death embodied. Like he's there. And then as we get into the second book, there's some more characters like that. Like I tend to use people from either Egyptian or Greek mythology,
yeah, yeah.
build those into the storyline, and that's where the second book expands. Also, Broken Reflections goes more. I've added more perspective, so it jumps back and forth of like character to character and their experience of what's going on.
Oh, I love that. So you're currently writing the third book right now, like it's in process or?
Yeah, it's early process, so I tend to spend a lot of time writing the first chapter, and then after that, things just start to flow. So
Yeah.
right now, I'm kind of reworking how the first chapter goes. Like I started once, and then I set it aside for a couple of days. I'm like, that's not exactly it yet. So I kind of keep reworking till I'm at the point where I think, okay, this is the good starting point.
That's actually an interesting take. So like first chapter, like, okay, we are going to take a lot of time to really set the stage exactly how I want it. And then like with that foundation, now we can build a book. Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. It tells me where I'm going. Like I always have like again, I have the idea for the end in mind, but I need the beginning to kind of be that standing point. And once I feel like I'm comfortable with that, the rest of the writing will just flow. Like I wrote Broken Reflections in 3 months, or the first draft of it in three
No
months.
kidding. It just like when it was ready, it just like just
Yep.
flowed onto the paper.
Yep.
Goodness. Have you always written or like is this kind of like a newer dream or how did you kind of get going on this?
So I've always had a thing with writing. When I
Mhm.
was younger, high school into my 20s was more poetry.
Okay.
Uh, I did make a couple attempts at writing novels then, but they would never get beyond, 15, 20 pages before they would get filed away.
Yeah, you're like, we're going the wrong way. Yeah.
And it was figuring out just how to get beyond a sense of almost like perfectionism. Like I would write that and then be like, oh, this is no good. And then I would just stop.
Right. I've had that where like you've written something and you're like, okay, there's something here, but I don't know if it would take longer to literally start over or try to like fix this thing I already have. And I still don't really know the answer, like which is the better route, man. Oh. No, it looks wonderful though. So, how did you actually end up, sitting down to write like Echoes of Reckoning after just, I mean, you've always had a thing with writing, but at some point it obviously came together and you're like, okay, now is the time we're gonna make this real.
So Echoes of Reckoning started back in 2021. I just started writing one day and I'm like, okay, it started more as a rant on paper. Uh, I was just kind of like, okay, I started writing that. I got through about 100 pages.
Hmm.
And then I got stuck because I didn't have an ending figured out.
Yeah.
Uh, and it got set aside. And then in early 2023, I kind of got the urge to start writing again.
Okay.
And I wrote something completely separate. It was like a personal story that I'll probably never publish, but it ended up being like a quick 50-page manuscript of like, okay, here's a personal story that I was able to get out. And once that was done, I went back and took a look at this. I'm like, if I can do that, I can get through this one.
Right, right.
And it was liberating myself to be able to write and not worry about it. And that's what that draft before did, is I just wrote that automatically. Like I didn't worry about the words that were in my first draft. Like I
Mhm.
wasn't trying to craft it to be perfect. I was just writing a story. And when I reapplied that over to Echoes of Reckoning, I went from, 100 pages that had sat there for 2 years untouched to I was done with the book within maybe two to three more months after that. So it just, once it picked up, I was like, okay, this story's got legs now and it's moving.
That's valuable advice because it is easy to get stuck, especially like with the first book or whatever it is. I mean, but sometimes like I don't know, you write like a whole manuscript that just isn't good and take the pressure off, and you just throw it away, and you're like, okay, but I've climbed this mountain. I didn't climb it well, but I know that like, oh, okay, that can be done, and then you sit down and you work on the real thing, like something like that. I think that that could be incredibly valuable for authors starting out, kind of thing. So you began Echoes of Reckoning in 2021. Do you any idea where the story came from? I know that's kind of a difficult question because who the hell knows where ideas come from, right? But
Bits and pieces of this, yes, I do know. So when I was, again, back in my 20s, I used to write, like I said, poetry.
mm,
And one of the things I started on was this thing, Tales Behind the Broken Mirror.
okay,
And that's where this whole thing started to generate from. And it was kind of my own processing my own fears of death that
yeah,
started this whole thing. And it kind of trickled along. And as I've gotten older, I've done more, philosophical reading and pieces like
right,
that to get a better understanding, reading through different religious texts, different philosophical texts, different psychological texts, just to get this better understanding of this whole process, because it's something that we don't really like to talk about.
right. I mean, it's
What's eventually
maybe
coming.
the biggest thing ever to happen to us, but we just all kind of pretend like, yeah,
Right. So it was, in a way, it was writing this was my own coming to grips with, an inevitable reality of what's there,
right,
being able to look at it from a perspective of I can create it, because it's the one topic nobody can say you're wrong on, because really at the end, nobody's telling the story of, well, what's purgatory look like?
right, right, right. No one can say for sure, and unless
Yeah.
the one of those people had the out of body experience in the middle of surgery or
Right.
something. Like, what was
You
that
know,
15 minutes like? Oh,
the undertones of this, purgatory comes from Dante, and
yeah,
it
yeah.
not a lot of people are familiar with the fact that it's a 3 book series. Like people know primarily Inferno, where he talks about hell, but it's
But
the
the
whole
Divine
journey.
Comedy itself is,
Exactly. So where he
yeah,
goes from Inferno to Purgatorio to Paradiso,
yeah,
it's understanding that. And it's I just always found the Purgatorio book of it the most interesting, because it's always these people that are in transition. And even when you go back through like Greek mythology, when they talk about it, it's always those people. Like Hades was kind of more of an in between. It wasn't the hell to them. Hades was just an in between place where people were. And that's kind of what purgatory is. It's like this in between where everybody's stuck.
right. I God, I got so many thoughts on Dante. Um, what was the name of his guide?
Virgil.
Okay, I thought it was very unfair that Virgil would never be able to access heaven simply because he was born before the time of
Yeah.
Jesus. And I was like, I absolutely believe in God, but that's not the God I know who's like, hey, well, sorry, you should have been born a couple hundred years later.
Like
Like, too
just a
bad,
little
guy.
late.
Like, oh, sorry, your timing was off, and now you're just gonna stay in here. But I found the hell part, the inferno, very interesting. That people's punishment was a direct reflection on the lives that they lived and the things they got wrong. And I thought
Right.
that was very clever. Like I've always kind of thought if there is a hell, it's not necessarily God just putting people there to punish you for all the things you didn't understand in your short little time on earth. It would be almost like maybe like a school or something, or you would almost maybe punish yourself for the things that you knew better. But I always thought it would be like, let's say, karmically appropriate, for lack of a better description, that um, the hell would be something of your own making based on bad decisions that you knew better throughout your life, kind of thing. So I do find the Divine Comedy to be an exceedingly, exceedingly interesting text.
That's something I weaved into
Mhm.
both of these stories in purgatory. Is it's not necessarily like I don't call it heaven, hell. I just purgatory is purgatory, but it's either they can go to a place of light or a place of darkness, and it's
Mhm.
determined on their own feelings of guilt, like what's stored up inside of them when they reach the afterlife of,
Right,
you make this decision. But purgatory is a place for them of indecision, like people that they don't know about their guilt. Like they've gone, but they just couldn't make a decision either way of like, do I feel guilty or not? So it's kind of a sorting ground of, Where
Interesting.
do you figure it out? Um, so I just, I built more of that thoughts into it of like, there's this just in between world where
Yeah.
you have to figure it out. What do you feel guilty about? And it's like those who go to a place of darkness, it's because they know that like that guilt just they can't escape it.
Right. And even if they like ignored it throughout their lives. And it is interesting. I think even there's a lot I want to say on this. First, yeah, for some reason this crossed my mind, but there was some Native American tribes who believed that like when you die, you go through a life review. And it's just like we're gonna look at everything you ever did. And it's not like God punishing you or anyone punishing you. It's just like this more transcendental self showing you how you lived your life, and you just got to face all the good and bad, and you just have a very realistic view of like what you got right, what you got wrong, where you need to grow, where you're doing well. And I think that's probably like the most fair take on probably like I don't know the way it might go. Um, there's and I love philosophy, so there's a lot to unpack in what you said there for sure. But it occurs to me like even among people who have like let's say the most psychopathic tendencies, and this is quick tangent, but like Ted Bundy, for example, like right before he got caught, I think he attacked like a sorority,
Yeah.
like somewhere where like there's no way this guy was going to escape, right? I mean, like dozens of people saw your face, and it's almost like even for a guy like that who consciously has no remorse, there's some part of him that like cannot escape the fact that like I want to be stopped, I want to get caught. So I kind of wonder, like, some people don't seem to have guilty feelings, but I'm not sure if it can be avoided, right? Like there has to be some piece of you deep down that like knows at any given moment what you're getting right and wrong, even if like you can kind of choose to be selfish, narcissistic, whatever it may be.
Right.
But your book's got me thinking, it sounds right up my alley because like I love the intersection of philosophy and fiction. And I love using a story as a stage to like really explore these questions about like who are we, why are we here, where are we headed, what are we supposed to be doing. So I am certainly I might have to treat myself for Christmas to Echoes of Reckoning. So it looks like Broken Reflections, I mean, came out pretty recently, yeah, like fairly recently.
Yeah. Broken Reflections, I released on November 5th.
Oh, no kidding. So just fresh out the gate.
Yeah. It's the
Okay.
baby book.
Oh, wonderful. In terms of like, do you do all your own editing or like, I mean, are you as an indie author, like you are all the hats or like, do you have kind of like a,
So editing, I hire someone to do a thorough edit review just because I know my spelling and grammar are atrocious. I can write stories, but when it comes to knowing did I use the word in the right context or my comma, like
those
special
things? Yeah.
punctuation, yeah, like I have to have someone else look at that. So I go through that process where I do pay someone to do that
Hmm.
portion of it for me. And then I also go through reviews with other like friends and family that I know that will do read throughs and catch stuff
Yeah.
and make sure that I haven't missed anything. Because what happens is I can only pay to do the one round because it gets expensive.
It adds up quick, right?
So I pay to do that one round, and then any changes I make after that, I make sure that I have more eyes on it to catch anything as I've
Yeah.
done my rewrites. And then the covers and the interior layout, I also hire this lady to do that as well, just because graphic design isn't my strongest point. So I want to make sure those covers, and she's done a fabulous job with it. I know that's the covers to me. It's like I want people to see and get a picture, but I want it to be a good picture that they see when they look at the book.
No, I mean the covers are outstanding, and despite the cliches, everyone does in fact judge a book by its cover. Yeah, but she's done an incredible job. I mean, I don't know something about. I mean, I could look at the cover all day. There's a lot, kind of this heavenly view, and then on the other side of the reflection is regular life on Earth, and it's almost like this person's in the inverted, upside down world within the world, and um, yeah, just like cannot cross through to like back into regular life kind of thing. I don't know. It definitely is a very intriguing cover. And it makes you want to like, okay, what is in this book? And I want to go find out. So
When
it's
the first time I saw that, I was just like, yes, perfect. And
that's the one.
she did that on the first try, and I'm like, okay, you get me, thank you.
None of this back and forth, like, no, you understand exactly
Yeah,
what would be like appropriate for this book kind of thing. Oh,
you got the assignment.
yeah, no, it's definitely worth that. And even for like the proofreading, I mean, I'm like pretty good, but it is so hard to read your own work. It's like because your brain knows what's in there, so it's like you skip words. Like there's like entire things you just cannot see when you like try to proofread your own stuff. So certainly worth, yeah,
Yeah.
getting someone else for that.
that's where I've taken to actually printing the book out now because I've
Mm.
realized reading it on the screen, my proofreading's worse. So what I've started doing is because with Amazon you can upload a starter cover, throw
Right.
your manuscript in it, and get yourself a printed copy. And I
Yep.
found I actually do better reading through that way and catching my edits. I'm more prone when it's on a page to go, what am I saying there?
Right. And like actually holding a tangible book and get the
Right.
highlighters and the pens going and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's something on a computer screen. You tend to, it's harder to catch everything.
Oh yeah.
Um, yeah. So I see you got the audiobook also for Echoes of Reckoning. That's awesome. I honestly just discovered ACX like a couple months ago. And I was like, I had no idea. I mean, there's this like entire world, right? I mean, like I thought like an author needed thousands of dollars to like get an audiobook out there. And I'm like, not necessarily. Like there's narrators who would partner up with you. But I found like, yeah, that opens up a whole new market of just people who love to read and maybe don't have time, but they're sitting in a car driving to work 45 minutes each way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's I mean, that was the reason it came up is I had a good friend and she was telling me her father was interested, but he only does audiobooks. I'm like, well, I want to do one, and I same thoughts. I'm like, that's just so like I started looking with some of the companies and they were expensive. But then
Right.
I found I lucked out and found a friend of a family member
Mm.
who did this anyways. So I got, he cut me in a decent deal to kind of do the narration for it. And we're, breaking up to split royalties on it.
Right, right.
So it's a fair deal that we've worked out. And he's actually doing the one for Broken Reflections right now. So I'm hoping
Nice.
early next year, I should have the audiobook for that.
No, that's outstanding. Especially like someone who you know and like can actually collaborate with and you can, actually talk to them about like the characters and the back and forth and oh, can we maybe adjust this here, try something else. So
Yep.
there's a lot of ways to do the same thing, but I love the idea of like working with someone and I love the idea of also like collaborating with other people on your art, right? You're like I wrote this book and this other person can give it new life entirely and I mean this whole book can just have a life of its own, once it's out there.
I mean, the first time you get to hear your own words, that was just kind of a surreal thing. Like when he sent the final files over, and I'm listening, I'm like, oh, this is a cool story. I'm like, oh, I wrote that.
You're like, oh wait, I made that. Yeah. No, there are certain moments like that, right? It's like the first time your book is delivered to you,
Yeah.
you're like, holy hell, like I'm holding this thing that was just an idea a few years ago. And then yeah, listening to the audiobook and it's someone else's voice and you're like, whoa, like I wrote that. You're like, oh, this is pretty good. It's an incredible feeling. It is certainly an incredible feeling.
Yeah, you hit those lines sometimes. Like when I was listening to the audio book, I'm like, that was a really good line. I'm like, oh, I wrote that. Oh, you have your humble moments sometimes, but sometimes you get that little bit of an ego boost of like, oh, I did that.
No, it is amazing, honestly. And we need that too because the indie thing, it is quite a journey being an indie author
Oh,
for sure. And there
absolutely.
are days where it doesn't make sense, but there are those moments that are like profound and you're like, I'm supposed to be here. Like this is cool. Yeah. And as a book lover, sometimes, you like hear your own stuff and you're like, as a reader, I'm like, damn, like I like that. Like I don't care who wrote it. Like I like that. Yeah. Beyond this series, do you have any other big plans? And obviously, like, task at hand, you're working on the third book, and it's like we shouldn't even entertain other stories right now. Like, let's stay focused. But
So
do you have other stories on the back burner?
I'm always going. I've always got a kind of a run of what's happening. So in tandem with the third book in the series, I'm also working on a poetry book. So I've gone back and collected all of my old poetry that I wrote in my 20s and early 30s.
Nice.
Working on editing that now. That should be out, I'm thinking around March.
That's cool.
Then outside of this, yeah, I have at least two other stories that I'm working right now. They're when I get kind of caught up in an area with the current book, when I can't get any further, I'll pause, take a break, or sometimes I just have something that comes in for these other stories that I'm like, I've got to add this before I forget it.
Right. I got to put this down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those one when it calls out, I know they're active. I don't spend a lot of time focusing on them right now, but I'm hoping once I get through the series, if this ends up being the last one, then I'll transition to them. Otherwise, I'll just kind of keep adding pieces. And, one year I may be able to get two books out instead of one.
That's pretty, I have noticed that too, that like when you're in like a good creative flow and you're writing one book, somehow all these other unrelated stories just like come to you and like they all want to pull you in different directions. But sometimes like your absolute best work comes out of like it's just like a flash in the dark when you're working on something else entirely. And you're like, it's something about almost like tuning yourself to ideas or something. You're like, I'm receptive to whatever will come in. Yeah. So
Yeah,
that's, yeah.
I do a daily meditation, and instead of trying to clear my brain, I normally that's when I focus on the story and I'm really trying to draw in and feel the emotions of what I'm currently writing on. And that tends to be some of the times where I get just like the best flashes of like, oh, this is what I need to do, or
Right.
the direction I need to go. And that's been so helpful for me. I started that probably halfway through Echoes of Reckoning and just kind of kept it up, and it helps to keep that inspiration going.
Absolutely. And that I can kind of as a bridge into the next topic. So I can tell just from like the way your books came together, the reviews, even the way you approach social media, you have a lot of good information that would be like incredibly valuable to, I mean, every indie author, but definitely the people who are just starting out who are like, hey, I'm working on my first book or I'm thinking about it or I just published. What would you tell some of these indie writers who are starting out in terms of like, just how to make this real, like how to chase this dream?
The first thing I would tell them to focus on is just writing. Like, the writing is the most important part, but also when you're doing your first draft, don't make it perfect. It's not the time for perfect. It's if you even if it's just a train of thought, get the words on the page, worry about fixing it later on. I know there's some people that want to go back and have it so detailed, and some people that works, but I think for a lot of people that say they want to write, they try to start writing, their roadblock is they're trying to do perfect right away. So if you can let that go and just put the words out there again, you first drafts are always sloppy. They're messy. Like
Most
you
of them are not very good. Yeah.
right. So it's just the point of getting the story out, even if it's not the full length of the book. Like again, for me, a lot of the times I'll do a first draft and it will be 100 to 150 pages. And then I turn it into a 300 to 400 page book because I know once I'm done, I'm going to go back and be like, sometimes as I'm writing, I'll just be like, add conversation here
Right.
because I
Right.
don't know what that conversation is when I'm doing it, but I know it needs to be there.
Yeah.
So it's just getting the story out and then refining it from there. Like I think that again, that's a big holdup for everyone when they're writing it is you try to get perfect on the first draft, and it's where you lose a lot of inspiration and motivation when you're doing that.
Yeah, you're like too meticulous and you impede the creativity. But I'm sure, like I've experienced this, I'm sure you have too, that when you tell people, "Oh, I'm an author," you meet people constantly who are like, "Oh my God, I had this book idea and like I always wanted to do that." And there's so many people who don't start. And maybe one of these hangups is like, "Ah, I tried writing and like I have no idea how to actually write what I'm trying to say," or I mean, they're intimidated to even put the first words on paper or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's putting yourself out there, and it definitely it can make you feel uncomfortable. Yeah, because at some point you want people to read it. Um, So it's kind of allowing yourself at that point. And, some people, like you said, I've had people that come up now, they're like, oh, I have this idea for a story. I'm like, just start writing it. I'm
Just
like,
do it. Yeah.
even if you don't show it to anybody, just start writing it. Don't think about it. Write the story the way you think it should go and see from there. If you feel comfortable and want to do more with it, you will, but
Yeah.
you can never write a book if you don't start by putting a couple words on the page.
That's true. And I'll also add for any like readers or new authors listening to this, every author I've spoken to so far in this, podcast journey has written something that they've thrown away entirely. And it's just a natural, like if you write an entire book that isn't very good, it is okay to write a book that isn't very good and throw it out and start over. But that's maybe kind of a rite of passage, as it were, right? You know?
Yeah, it's you learn as you're writing. At least for me, it's been a journey of learning how to refine the craft. Like the first book was okay, like trying to get through. But then as I wrote the second book, I'm like, okay, I have a better understanding of what I need to do this time. Thinking about the three acts that they tell you to put in books. I didn't know that the first time I was writing. I'm just writing a story.
Right. Right.
So having that understanding, and you just learn as you go. And now I'm to the point where I'm working on the third book, and I've started diving into screenwriting because my
Hmm.
dialogue, while it feels real, sometimes I have a hard time with the show don't tell. And
Yeah.
screenwriting does a really good job of doing that. So I've kind of been studying some of the screenwriting to get myself further there because I want to keep progressing with the craft as I go.
Interesting. Are you like involved in any like local groups or anything like with the library? Or I know a lot of authors are. They have a, community of people that they're doing creative writing on a weekly basis.
For me, no, I am the ultimate introvert.
Yeah.
People scary.
No, I
Uh,
get that.
with my writing, the most community I've had so far is the TikTok community. So it's
Me too. Yeah.
being able to connect with other authors has been really nice through that. Because before, you know, I didn't know any other authors.
I no, honestly feel the same way in my actual life. I'll call it actual life. I don't know anyone who's writing or embarking upon this journey. But then you get on like TikTok and you're like, oh, there's a bunch of us. And it turns out like a lot of these indie authors are also the most loyal, avid readers. And, these people like, I mean, it's some of the nicest, most supportive. I mean, it just, I don't know. It's opening up these new channels that 20 years ago were closed. It's like the only way to win is like get an agent, go through the traditional means. That's the only way to succeed kind of thing. But there's this whole underground book world. um, it's been kind of amazing, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's finding that world. At first, I was kind of skeptical of book talk on there because a lot of what I was seeing was a lot of people that read the ACOTAR type series and stuff like that. So I'm like, am I going to fit in here? But you know, as soon as I started going on and promoting and talking about the book, like the community was so accepting on there, and I've
Right.
reached people that I probably would have never if I didn't. And the only challenge for me was getting on video. I am not video friendly. Like it is one of the most uncomfortable things for me. But I finally pushed myself. I'm like, I've got to do this because I want people to know these books exist.
Right. And you got to fight for your own dream. I had a similar conversation with another author that, like, on average, most writers are like introverts. So all of us like getting on camera and marketing, I mean, it is pushing our boundaries in such a big way, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's daily trying to get on and do 3 videos a day to keep with TikTok. It's one figuring out content because I'm just like, okay, what am I going to do today?
What have I
But
not said, right? You're like,
right, it's like how often do I want to repeat the same thing? And it's also like, what do people actually want to hear? Trying to figure that out, or based on the subject in my book, I also get censored with the algorithm all the time because it's a sensitive topic. So it's one
yeah.
of those like, how do I word this in a way that doesn't get me limited to 10 people seeing it?
Right. They'll immediately pull it or shadow ban it or something, right? Yeah, I've had a few on my other channel. I got pulled a bunch, and then one of them I like read a fake ransom note, and it was like, "I'm sorry for my video." But yeah, it is an interesting thing to navigate. There's some buzzwords that'll immediately
Yeah.
kind of get you banned there. But you are doing an amazing job. I mean, you're actually in a lot of ways taking the lead on kind of building a lot of community between the different authors and readers, and you know, kind of getting us all connected and coordinated. And there's new ideas rolling. And it's a very exciting time to be an indie author. Like I think the path today is probably clearer than it has ever been in previous years. That like, hey, there is a way to go from someone who wrote a book to has a career in writing without querying all the agents and going in Manhattan and knocking on doors. Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably one of the most disheartening processes I went through when I started trying the query process. And I hit a point where I'm like, you know what, I can do this on my own. I don't need an agent. Yeah, it gets you in the big bookstores and you get some more marketing dollars behind you, but at the same time, I'm more of a control freak. Like I thought of like, I don't want somebody else deciding what my covers are going to look like.
Writer saying we're going to cut this, we're going to change
Yeah,
this. You're like, mm.
I have to do more of the marketing, and that's definitely a learning point for me. But it's when it comes down to it, it's like I know I have control over my books, and I don't have to worry about waiting years because I'm also impatient. When I have a book done, I want it out there. I don't want to be like, oh, well, this will go out in 2 years. No, thank you.
Yeah, that whole thing, like it's going to take a year for us to work through it and edit it, and then it's going to be another 6 months for really no apparent reason, like totally arbitrary that everything's ready, but we're going to need another 6 months. And you're like, okay, you're like, am I a writer? Like I wrote a book, I swear I did, but I have nothing. Yeah.
With them, it's because it's like, well, we have this one author that we have to put out, so we can't put you out until like this whole cycle. And it's like, well, now I just decide this is when I'm putting my book out, and I'm learning to be craftier on release dates of figuring out like if you try to release in a certain time of year cycle, like you
Hmm.
start to figure out where the good points are to get people's attention.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's a learning in progress. And I think that's great where we have some of the community out here where we can share our learnings with each other.
I think so. I think, and honestly, I did want to talk to you about this. And then we will get into like, your plugs where people can find you and stuff. But I was thinking about like, there's all the indie authors, like there's some piece that we all do very well and know. And there's like so much all of us don't know. I mean, because there's an infinite amount to know, and there's a lot of scams too. Like Twitter in particular, I've never had so many like fake solicitations from all kinds of people who, who knows who they are, where they're from. But at least TikTok's better like that. I don't get many like fake, I don't know, kind of things. But I was thinking like what would be really extraordinary is if, 100 indie authors all made a 3 to 5 minute video of something that they know very well. And then like we could literally put together a master class in a matter of like a day. And then it would just be like a playlist with even like, I could construct a PDF that's like, here's the bullet points going from like starting to writing to, I don't know, getting it done, editing, different resources. Here's where you can mark it, and that would save, I mean, that would benefit all of us, but also like for these new authors, it'd be like, because some of the things they shouldn't have to learn the hard way the way I had to learn the hard way. Like I didn't know about Amazon self-publishing for so long. I was like, I'm gonna write a book and then we're gonna figure out publishing after that.
Right.
And then learned a lot of things the hard way. And it'd be cool to have kind of a guide. And I think there's a lot you would have to offer for that. I think, there's some things I can offer, but I like this the more and more we're all kind of working together thing.
Yeah, it's
Inspiring.
exciting, where we get more people, more authors coming together, and really being able to share that with people that are coming in, because there really is a lot to learn as you're going through. And you also have some of those predatory vanity presses that will go out there and try to get money for people for stuff
Yeah.
that they can do. And I've had a couple of conversations with folks about that, and I'm like, be very careful. I'm like, most of the stuff you can do a lot cheaper. I'm like, so whatever they're telling you, go take a look and price some things out on your own. I'm like, you can still hire people off of Reedsy, Fiverr. Like, there's
Right,
people
right.
out there that do this, and you're going to get a better deal than what you're seeing through these vanity presses. Who you're still going to have to do all the marketing. You're still going to have to put all of it out there. It sets on your hands, and you're not going to really get the value of it. Especially like some of them like will promise like websites. I'm like, you can hire someone cheaper to build the website, and they'll help you out. Trust me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And they'll, they take advantage of maybe the fact that one, you don't know your other options, but you're inspired. You're an artist and artists thrive on enthusiasm, right? Like I just finished my book. I'm so excited. The world is my oyster. And they're like, "Oh my God, we love your book. This is amazing. We want to make it real, but we're going to need $4,000. But look, we're paying for half of it. Look, we're also paying for 4,000." I'm like, "Okay, and it's very easy to fall for. And I certainly fell for it a few times.
Oh, I
But
went through that. I went through that when I was trying to like look at alternatives when I was querying, and I'm like, oh, this seems really cool. And I'm like, all right, I could put that money together. And then I started looking, I'm like, I can get these different resources done. I'm lucky enough that I have a tech background. So websites, things like that. I'm like, I don't need you
I'll
to
do
do that.
that.
I can do that on my own, or I have friends that can help out with that. And then I started looking through, and that's when I started doing more research, going, okay, vanity presses, not a good rap out there in the community. And the more I was reading up on, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to go through that.
No, there's other ways. There's other paths. So we are down to 1 minute. I want to make sure that we get your information out there. So any readers listening to this, any authors who want to check out Ron's work, um, anything you want to tell us, like
Yeah.
usernames, plugs, where to
So
go?
yeah, you can find me on TikTok is the main avenue for social media. That's Ron Shaw 603. And then also I have my website, ronshawwrites.com. Those are the two easiest places to get a hold of me.
Cool. I love it. Yeah, and we're connected on TikTok, and that's where you're putting out most of your content. So, and Ron's got a lot of good information. He's bringing a lot of amazing people together. So I would definitely check him out there if you are on TikTok. And his book's on Amazon. The reviews are stunning. I would definitely go check him out, after you watch this episode. I'll put his links in the video description.
Excellent. Thank you.
Cool. I appreciate it, Ron. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Cool. We'll talk soon.
All right. Take
Thanks.
care.